Hey guys, welcome back to True Crime with Shannon, where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. Well, the former school resource officer from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School is on trial. He just started his trial today. Now, this is Officer Scot Peterson. Scott with one T, not to be confused with the other Scot Peterson, which most of us are familiar with. I'm going to go through the opening statements and then I will continue to cover the trial if folks are interested in it. There were opening statements, and I believe 4 witnesses for the state did go on the stand today. He's been dubbed, Scot Peterson's been dubbed the, quote, Broward Coward. He's been criticized for his actions after a surveillance video was found showing him remaining outside the high school while shots were fired during the horrible shooting at the high school. So let me play the opening statement from the state, and then we will play the defense.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, February 14th, 2018 actually started out as a rather nice day. It was Valentine's Day. And the weather, typical South Florida February weather. Sunny, partly sunny, warm temperatures. The day was going along smoothly at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School is located at the north end of the county in Parkland, Florida. It's a large school, almost over 3,000 students attend that school. And it was just a normal day in February. But excitement for the kids and students because it was Valentine's Day. Years ago, there was a song about one moment in time. And one moment in time can really change everything. And on this day, at approximately 2:19 in the afternoon, Nicholas Cruz, and I'm going to only say his name once from here on, and I will refer to him as either the shooter, the active shooter, or the gunman. The shooter gets out of a Uber on Pine Island Road. There's a little path that goes into the school, and the school, it was 2:19. The school day ends at 2:40. So by that time of the day, the school monitors were going around and opening up the gates because students are going to be let out, school buses were coming in, parents were coming up to pick up kids, students who are old enough to drive would be able to drive out to go home. So having had attended that school, he knew a little path where the gate was now open that would lead him to what is known as Building 12. It's also called the 1200. You'll hear the 1200 building. Sometimes you might hear the freshman building or Building 12. All the same thing. It's a 3-story building, built or opened at least in 2009. It contains 30 classrooms. Now, if I can get I see it, the monitor will work right. We'll put up the first drawing there. Hopefully everybody can see this diagram that's up. This is a diagram of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. You can see all the different buildings, the campus, and way up in the top, sort of to the top of it, more on the right side, is Building 12. And far over on the other side is, well, just to the, what would be to my right is Pine Island Road. And there's a little path that's in and around this area right in here. And that's where the gunman is walking toward the 1200 building. It's 2:19 he gets out. At around 2:20 in the afternoon, he's going to walk into the building. And you will see as the trial progresses, the video, surveillance video, and you will see that the students, it's a kind of a normal day. 3 students walk in just before he walks in, and then he enters the building, and he turns, makes a hard right, and goes into the stairwell. Now, I'm going to stop that story here, because there's background information that you all need to know and understand in regards to this case and to regards to this defendant before we continue on as to what happened that horrible, horrible afternoon at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The defendant, Scot Peterson, was a deputy with the Broward Sheriff's Office for approximately 32 years. Out of those 32 years, he was a SRO, what is known as an SRO. That's a school resource officer. And school resource officers in general are assigned to certain schools, and it is their duty under contracts that are signed between the cities and the school board and a law enforcement agency. In this case, the contract is signed between the school board and BSO, because he was a deputy for BSO, and then he was assigned to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And that contractual agreement puts the defendant under a duty to the school. He's there for security purposes. He's the lead security person at that school. And he has special powers that he's allowed to do that other officers can't. He can conduct an administrative search if he wants without probable cause, but only on campus. So he has special powers that are given to him to help keep the school safe, to make sure the students are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and in general, just to know the school itself, to know the buildings, to know the administrators, to know the teachers, to know even some of the students. So that if anything ever goes wrong, he is the person who knows, for the most part, where everything is. He's been in the school. He knows where it is. He has been the SRO at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas since 2009. So he's 28 years as an SRO, but he became Marjorie Stoneman Douglas's SRO in 2009. So that's 9 years, approximately, before that fateful day occurred. Now, during that interim, those periods, the defendant has lots of training. He is trained on active shooter scenarios. He is trained how to handle a situation where he is the only person there, the only law enforcement person there, to handle an active shooter. He's also trained that he has another officer with him or a group of officers, how to go in and how to handle an active shooter type situation. For the most part, active shooter situation, you go toward the gunshots. You're trained to go toward those shots, to find that shooter, because every shot could be a death. In the old days, it was, form a perimeter, not after Columbine. It changed. Usually, active shooter scenarios happen very quickly. And you've got to get in and you've got to find the shooter, do everything you can to find him so that you can stop the killing. Now, there's other things that the defendant learns and the school administrators learn. As a matter of fact, just a month before this awful incident, they had a program for the school administrators to learn and the teachers about hardening their classrooms and what to do if all of a sudden you're faced with an active shooter situation. So the teachers and the administrators are learning that they need to harden their classrooms, have safe places in their classrooms, keep the doors closed and locked, cover the windows. This practical advice that would help stop an active shooter. Now, the defendant is also trained. He's trained as an SRO. He's trained on all the special things that an SRO does for a school. And he's also trained, of course, on his weapon and how to use his weapons in whatever scenario he may face. So, He becomes the SRO of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in 2009. 2016, he has training on active shooter. In 2017, he has more SRO training. And finally, we come up in 2018. That training the month before was done at the school for the staff and teachers. And the defendant was there for that also. Now we go back to that day, that afternoon. First thing you need to understand is that there is surveillance throughout the school. There are surveillance cameras inside the 1200 building. There are surveillance cameras outside the 1200 building. There are surveillance cameras all over the school. They don't cover everything. There are certain sections that don't get covered. There's no cameras in the classroom. There's no cameras, obviously, in the restrooms. There's no cameras in the teachers' lounges. And sometimes there's just not a camera in certain areas or captures a certain area. And one of those areas happens to be the very front of the 1200 building, the 12 building. That's where the shooter enters. There's two doors that go right into a main hallway, and there's a third door that goes into the stairwell. The school itself, the 12th building, has two stairwells. There's an east stairwell, and then one at the far end of the building that's the west stairwell. So, again, by looking at the screen, we're talking about the 1200 building, or the building 12. At the time that the shooter enters the 1200 building, gets out of the Uber and goes into the 1200 building, the defendant and a lot of the administrators in the school's security specialist, Kelvin Greenleaf, and the vice principals are all in and around the number 1 building. That's the administration building, which you can see is actually, it's south of the 1200 building, because this is north, east, west, and south. And if you don't really like directions or don't like east and west, north and south, unfortunately, in this trial, you're going to hear a lot of that. And I'll show you why with this second photograph. This shows the interior of Building 12. And it's important because the shooter takes a certain route. He goes from east to west on the first floor, west to east on the second floor, and then on the third floor, east to west. So in looking at that diagram, all of this is on the east side, see, and all the other side is the west side. So the way it's oriented, it's east and west, but the classrooms themselves are north and south. For example, classrooms on the first floor, 1256 or 1255, face north. Classrooms 1254 or third floor, 1254 or 1257 face south. And that's the same for all the floors. The first floor is down at the bottom, and you can see it's 1217 and 1218 are the furthest classrooms to the east, and 1202 is the furthest classroom to the west. And the floors are basically the same. There's bathrooms on each floor, and some of the floors have teachers' lounges or offices. So it's important to have that orientation of the inside of the building, and it's going to be important to have the orientation of the outside of the building. The shooter enters the school with a gun bag and ammunition, quite a bit of it. He immediately goes into that east stairwell. He makes that hard right, because just before him you're going to see 3 students walking in. Ashley Baez, she's going to walk down for the farther end, the west end of the hall, and but you're also going to see Martin Duque and Luke Hoyer walking in just before he walks in. Martin and Luke will go down the hallway slightly, and they will stop in front of classroom. You can see on the bottom on the first floor, in front of classroom 1215. And sitting in front of classroom 1215, working on a computer, she had asked special permission, is Gina Montalto. So the three of them, Luke, Gina, and Martin, are in front, or they're in that little alcove. You can see there's the 1215 classroom and the 1214 classroom, and they have, the doors are in a little alcove, and that's where they are. Now, the shooter takes out his gun, and just as he's doing that, another student happens to just walk through and into the stairwell by accident. And he quickly leaves. He sees the gun, he sees the shooter, and the shooter says, something bad's about to happen, get out. He gets out. And then the shooter exits that stairwell, the bottom, goes out, takes his weapon, and fires it down the first floor corridor. So he's at the far east end, and he begins firing. This is around 2:21-ish, 2:21:33 seconds that he begins firing. And you're going to be also hearing, not just north, south, east, and west, you're going to be hearing a lot of times, because the timing is important as to where everybody is. So we know at that time, he's on the first floor of that building shooting. Where is everybody else? Most everybody else is over, if you're talking about the defendant or the administrators, they are over near the administration building 1, and the other picture that I had up. Shortly after those first shots are fired, the video from outside the number 1, the administration building, shows security specialist Greenleaf and defendant Peterson meeting outside that building. And they start to walking out. They're not rushing, they're walking toward a cart. Everyone at the school uses golf carts. They use them to get around the campus. And they're going to get on the golf cart because information has come over the school radio that something is happening in the 1200 building. Something's not right. So they go to get a cart. It turns out they can't get the key for the cart, turn it on. And they turn around, they start walking the other way, and another cart pulls up. And in the cart is school monitor Medina. Medina had been over by the 1200 building. Now he comes over, and at about the same time, the alarm system in the school goes off. Now, this is another thing we have to discuss. The school, the alarm system in the 1200 building and the 1300 building was a little newer than the rest of the school's alarm system. It was much louder. There were alarms in every room in the 1200 building, and every classroom had an alarm. Then they make a piercing noise when they go off. In the rest of the school, it would be like a siren alarm, but it would be heard throughout the school. If it goes off in one building, the whole school goes off, and it's controlled from the administration building. So as they're hopping onto the cart, the defendant gets in the seat next to Medina. Medina's driving, he's next to him, and Mr. Greenleaf gets in the back. And they take off. And Medina is driving them right to the 1200 building. So they're now on their way to the 1200 building. Meanwhile, as that process is happening, the shooter has fired, and then those initial bullets hit and killed Luke Hoyer, Gina Montalto, and Martin Duque. At least they initially certainly injure them, and then he later comes back and shoots them again. And that was the end. When he's done firing those initial shots, he turns to the building across from the 1215 building. You can see 1216 is across the hall. And he fires into 1216 through the door and through the window that's embedded in the door. He fires into that classroom twice. And in that classroom, the shots hit and killed Alex Shackner, Elaine Petty, and Elisa Allen. It is at that point, when he is down the first floor, he's made it down, as you can see where 1213 is, he's made his way down the floor, first floor. It is about that time that the security cameras pick up that golf cart. You can see in the distance that golf cart, all of a sudden it appears on the screen, it crosses the screen, and then it disappears. Because it's now going to stop on the southeast corner of the 1200 building. I'll put the other map up for just a second here. The cart comes racing between the 7 and 8 building, and it goes to the southeast corner of the 12 building, while the shooter is still on the first floor. He is now down toward the end of that hallway. Now, just prior to that, in the cart arriving, a school monitor, Chris Hickson, runs into the 1200 building from the east end. He's running into the building, from the west end. He runs into the building it's in between 13 and 12, and he runs at the west end of the 12 building. Remember, the shooter initially fires down the hallway, and then when Chris Hickson comes in through those doors, those west doors, he fires again, and he hits Chris Hickson, the monitor, and Hickson is hit, and he rolls off to the north side of the hallway. There's like a little indentation because there's either a bathroom or there's a closet there, and he rolls over that way to get out of the line of fire in the hallway. But he's injured. He's still alive, but he is injured. The monitor, Medina, he drops off the defendant, and he drops off Greenleaf, the security specialist, as I said, at the southeast corner of the 1200 building. Just about at the time, the shooter now has made his way all the way down the hallway, and as he gets to the end, he looks and he sees Chris Hickson. And it appears that he fires again into Chris Hickson. And then he turns. I'm going to put the other photograph back up now. He turns, because now he's at the far west end of the first floor. So he is all the way down at the far west end. And those red and black markings that you see, those are just the placement of security cameras in the school, in the 1200. So now he's made his way all the way down the first floor. And he has killed Luke, Gina, Mark, Alex, Elisa, Elena, Helena, because Elena and Helena, Nicholas, Carmen, and Chris Hickson. And Alex Shack. He turns, he's going to go up the stairwell now. He's going to go up to the second floor. He's going to turn to his left and go into the first floor stairwell at the west end of the building. And as he does that, the timing could not have been worse. As he turns and goes into that stairwell landing on the first floor, the school monitor, another school monitor, Aaron Feiss, is rushing into the building. And Aaron Feiss opens the door to go inside, and the shooter is right there, and he shoots and kills Aaron Feiss. And Aaron Feiss does not make it inside the building. He's shot twice, he's killed, and he falls on the outside patio. The defendant and Greenleaf are at the other end of the building. They are at the far other end of the building, the outside. They are about as far as away from the shooter as they could possibly be at that point. Those shots are heard. The defendant will yell shots fired into his BS. He has two radios. One is the school radio, one is the BSO dispatcher. He will yell shots fired. At the same time, you'll see video of students who were evacuating the 700 building. And now this is where things get a little interesting, but a little complicated in the sense that you had a fire alarm go off, and then it gets shut off. And there was no reporting back of what the fire was, so nothing came over the school, the PA system. So the kids in the 700 building start to evacuate. They're doing what they're supposed to do when there's a fire. So they start coming out. That building faces the 1200 building. And that building does not have an inside. The corridors or the classrooms all face the outside. So this is the 700 building. And those students are coming out because they're following their fire evacuation plan when they hear the shots. And you can tell, they're all kind of just walking out because they think it's a fire, and then or a drill, most likely, and then all of a sudden, they hear something, and they just go scattering back to the 700 building. Shooter continues up and down the second floor. Now, the kids in the 700 building were evacuating for a fire break. The students and teachers on the second floor of the 1200 building have heard the gunshots. They had the training the month before about what to do when you have an active shooter, and they have all gone into their classrooms. They've gone into the safest portions of those classrooms, the hardened areas, those areas where if you shoot through the door, you don't open it, but you shoot through it because it should be locked, you wouldn't be able to hit anyone because they would all be in a hardened corner. And when the shooter gets up to the second floor, it's empty. There's nobody in the hallway. Totally empty. And he begins to make his way down the second floor. Now he's going, again, from west to east. He's done the whole first floor, and he's going the other direction on the second floor from west to east. And as he goes down that floor, he shoots into classroom 1231. There's nobody to hit, but he shoots three rounds into that classroom. And then he'll continue further down. That classroom, 31, faces the north side of the corridor. And then he shoots into 1234, which faces the south side of that corridor. Nobody in that room either. Now we have to go back outside. What's happening outside, right? For approximately 27 seconds, you do not see Kelvin Greenleaf or the defendant, Peterson. You don't see them because there's no camera in front of the 1200 building. They are standing where they were dropped off. You do see the cart that brought them there, with Medina driving it, it goes off. You see that go off into the distance to the east. But they are left there. And they stand there for approximately 27 seconds or so. And then they move. And they move, and I know this is getting a little back and forth, but we have to, it's a little hard to tell, but they move from the southeast corner of the 1200 building to right here between the 700 and the 800 building. There's an alcove. That is the alcove that the cart had run through, and it was coming up from building 1 to building 12. So there's an alcove there, and that's where they move. They go from the 1200 building to the alcove. The defendant will never leave that alcove while the shooter is in the building. And actually doesn't leave it until almost 40, give or take, 40 minutes or a little bit longer when everything is finished. The whole time he's there is about 48 minutes or so. And that is from when he first arrives, which is where the shooter at that point is on the second floor, until it's all over. By 3:11, they were already evacuating kids out of the building. Kelvin Greenleaf is over there with him. He's not a police officer, he's just a security specialist. He doesn't have a weapon. From this spot, they are able to see, from that spot there, they can see the 1200 building, east end, and the south side, all the way down to the west part of the 13 and 13 building. Those 5 students are flying out of the 1200 building on the east side. Nobody stops them. Nobody asks them what's going on. You see security specialist Greenleaf, he's to the south, which would be if the defendant is here, he's just sort of right behind him. And the camera picks up Greenleaf. That camera picks up Greenleaf. There's another camera that's looking down the side of this building, all the way down here. That picks up defendant Peterson. That points when he's coming in and out of that alcove. He stays in the same spot, but he moves a little bit back and forth, and sometimes you can see him, and sometimes you can barely see him. But Greenleaf is right behind him, and you see Greenleaf like going, to the kids, move, or just gesturing at them. Nobody talks to them. Nobody finds out why are they fleeing out of the building. And there's no cameras on that east end of the building to show them coming out. You see them from the inside running out after they see what happened on the first floor, but you don't get to see what happened when you're outside. But nobody's nothing. They're not talking. And that was a reaction because the rest of the students had heard those shots on the second floor, and they'd all run back upstairs. 2 days later, in an interview with Detective Curcio. Detective Curcio is taking interviews with everybody. He's the lead detective on the Cruz case, the shooter's case. And he's just taking statements from people to find out what they did that day and what was going on so they can gather information. And the last charge that you heard the judge read you, the perjury charge, it comes from that statement, wherein the defendant doesn't, or says that he only saw so many children, and he come out of the building and didn't see any children, and also he heard only a few shots. And none of the perjury charges arise out of that out of that interview. It was a horrific day, and 17 beautiful people were lost. Another 17 were injured. The ones, in this case, the charges all stem from the third floor. They're all from either people who passed away on the third floor or who were injured on the third floor. But overall, it was a unspeakable day, horrible day. Thank you.
So I did edit down the DA's opening statement. He goes into quite more in depth into the shooter's positioning and whatnot. But basically, most of us are pretty aware. They are alleging that Deputy Peterson stood there in that location between the 1200 and 700 building with his weapon out and did nothing. That's the basic allegations against him, and of course also the perjury, which the attorney stated as well. So they're just stating that he should have entered that building, and that's their case. So let's jump over to the defense's opening, which I will play in its entirety. Again, I will put chapters on here. Well, I'll put out the timestamps rather in the information of the video so you guys can skip through it. But let's jump over to the defense.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here because my client was sacrificed. The evidence will show that he was thrown under the bus. My client is not a criminal, and the evidence will not prove that he committed any criminal offenses at all. He didn't know where those shots were coming from precisely. We've got 22 witnesses under subpoena who will come in here and tell you that they too heard the same shots my client did and could not discern precisely where the shots were coming from. There was a pronounced echo and reverberation that the witnesses will talk about that left them hearing the same shots and wondering, where is that coming from? He did everything that he possibly could with the limited information that he had to help serve and protect everybody at that school. He was sacrificed.
Judge, in your honor.
It's over with opening statement. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this purpose of opening statement is for the lawyers to tell you what they believe the evidence is going to show, but I'll remind you what the lawyers say is not evidence. Go ahead, sir.
Details matter. We wanted jurors who are extremely detailed, and I'm going to get into the weeds so you understand specifically what occurred. Numbers. Let's talk some numbers because they don't lie, and that kind of sets the parameters of what happened. First number, 6:36. 6 minutes and 36 seconds. That's how long that monster, Nicholas Cruz, was in the 1200 building committing his atrocities. Merely 6 minutes and 36 seconds. My client was there at the end of his rampage for 4 minutes and 15 seconds. I wanted to make sure you all had notepads so you could write down these details. They're critical. 4 minutes and 15 seconds. What is not in dispute at all is that when the shooter was on the first floor, killing faculty and children, my client wasn't even on the scene yet, which is why he's not charged at all with those offenses. 17 and 17, more numbers that do not lie, that are uncontroverted. 17 children, 17 total people were killed as a result of this atrocity. 17 were injured. Of the 17 that were killed, 14 of them were children. I want you to take a look and understand why we're here. We're here because of this monster. This person chose to commit one of the worst mass shootings in our nation's history. He destroyed families. He destroyed lives. Everyone was affected by his terror. He is the one to blame for what happened that day. That is not in dispute. He chose to arm himself with an automatic, powerful weapon and kill innocent people. Those are actual screenshots of him doing what he did. Not if, but when you have very strong feelings in this case, whether it be because of the photos that they intend to introduce, showing blood, gore. Understand who's responsible for that. Not my client. More numbers. 32. 32 years my client dedicated himself to law enforcement and serving this community. 32 years. An unblemished record. You know, we have this image of cops as they age, as being in one of two categories. That idea that you've got some donut-eating, lazy cop who's got 1 foot in retirement, can't wait to get out the door. That was not my client. Every single witness we've spoken to, and who will testify, will tell you he was an exemplary officer. No ideas that he might be a coward in any way. He was great at what he did. A loving father of 4 children, 2 who served in the military, lovely wife. He went to work that day never thinking that some sick, twisted monster would do what he did. My client was one of those ones that Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who would get in the middle of kids who were fighting. He would risk his life to protect others. If anybody needed any investigation done, he was there for them. Everybody will tell you, teachers, faculty, if they needed something done, he was the guy. He took care of things. He devoted his life to what he called his children. His children. He's broken up about what occurred. He was an award-winning deputy. In 2012, he won Parkland's Deputy of the Year.
You're going to object.
What's the legal objection?
It's argument, and it's also, that was part of, I believe, our motion in limine in this case. The court ruled on it and previously.
No, it's overruled as to both. Again, what the attorneys think the evidence is going to show at trial. Go ahead, sir.
The evidence will show that he won in 2012 Parkland's Deputy of the Year. In 2015, he won Parkland's School Resource Officer of the Year. And then once again in 2016, he won Parkland's Deputy of the Year. This is within just 2 years of the February 2018 vicious attack on that school. This was an award-winning, decorated officer. He was an elite officer who did his job zealously and professionally and with courage. So what we have here is a man with a decorated history of serving the community for 32 years, and in literally 4 minutes and 15 seconds, they're claiming he became a criminal. That's what they're alleging. And understand what we're here for. We're not here to say, well, could he have done things differently if he had certain information? Administratively, should he have been, reprimanded? Should we award money to people? That's not what we're here for. We're here for one purpose. Because as we've learned, someone from their office filed a document, an information, a charging document, claiming 11 counts. And he has stood before this court and he said, I am not guilty. And for 4 years, every time he came to court, he said, I am not guilty. Because he's innocent. And he did not accept responsibility for crimes that he did not commit. Now, how did we get here? We'll talk about that now. How does a decorated officer who did everything he could with the knowledge that he had, and we'll get into that, how does he sit as a defendant with his liberty at stake in criminal court? Details matter. So let's go back to February 14, 2018. That's when the massacre occurred. Now, whether it's right or wrong, the people at the top always get blamed. Sometimes it's justified, sometimes not. If it's raining outside, well, it's the president's fault. Gas prices go up, president's fault. But sometimes it's justified. What I will not do in this case at all is tell you whether Sheriff Scot Israel, who was the head of the Broward Sheriff's Office, whether it was justified that he was getting tons of criticism immediately after this. I will not get into that because I don't like the idea of anybody blaming someone without having all the facts. I won't do that. I won't be a party to that. You got one finger pointing out, you got three pointing back. But what I will say is that the governor did find that he was incompetent and he was removed from office. But before that ever happened, Sheriff Israel, who was on the hot seat, did a Jake Tapper CNN town hall meeting.
Is budget objection irrelevant?
Well, as to the relevancy objection, it's overruled, but, Mr. Agar, so let's stick to what you think the evidence is going to be in this case. Go ahead, sir.
If they don't call him, we will call Sheriff Israel to testify. We will. We have no burden in this case, but we will make sure that we call him to testify. And he will admit to you that he was under pressure. Naturally so. He's at the top. People started to question why certain deputies didn't go in, and we'll get to why they did. He wasn't the only one, by the way. There was at least 6 others that we will call to testify. We will explain why they didn't go into the building either. They also thought the shots were coming from a different area, based on the reverberation and based upon the echo. Good, meaningful, dedicated officers. Some who initially lost their job, but then fought and got it back, and they're working now. They have their jobs. My client's fighting for his liberty. But Sheriff Israel took that heat. I'm not saying it's justified, but he was under the gun. A lot of heat's coming his way. So he goes on CNN town hall meeting with Jake Tapper, televised, for everybody to see. And he defends consistently. Before that, after that, he's defending his officers. They did the best they could with the information that they had, based upon the circumstances. He knew no one had done anything wrong. Well, that didn't fly. He will tell you that even after he went on to that Jake Tapper town hall meeting, yeah, people didn't like some of the things he said, including that he showed great leadership. And his officers didn't do anything wrong. You know, he took a lot of heat. So what does he do? Understand, he's the head of BSO. Thousands of deputies. But like any of us, we have supervisors. And if something looks wrong, you bring in somebody and you say, well, tell us what happened. You know, why didn't you go in? And you sit down and you talk to him. You think that occurred? No, because that didn't fit his agenda. What you will learn, the evidence will show, is that Sheriff Scot Israel puts Sheriff Scot Israel number 1. Sheriff Scot Israel's ego is not his amigo. So what he did is the very next day, after he took the heat, after that CNN town hall meeting, and just so we're clear, this is who we're talking about. This is him at the CNN town hall meeting, defending everybody, no problem, but then he took the heat. And the very next day, this is him, at a very famous press conference that set into motion why he's sitting there.
Objection, Your Honor.
Again, it's overruled if that's what the lawyer believes the evidence is going to show. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I'll remind you, opening statements, this is not evidence. What the lawyers tell you is not evidence. It's what they believe the evidence is going to show. The objection is overruled. Go ahead, sir.
This press conference set into motion such unbelievable pressure. We'll talk about what happened. Let's talk about what he said and what he didn't say. He announces to the world, with all the media there, this was the biggest case around, biggest atrocity. People want to know what happened. And at that press conference, he said, regarding my client, well, he didn't go in to kill the killer. Now, what did that mean to all of us? I mean, anyone watching. Okay, wait a second. Someone from the police force, it's not very usual. What made it so credible is it's not usual to hear a police officer say something negative about another police officer. But even worse, and what made his words so problematic, is that it came from the top. A guy that people knew, a public figure, who spent his career trying to get everyone to perceive him as credible and believable and honest. And now he's throwing my client under the bus He's saying he should have gone in to kill the killer. What did that mean to all of us? Number one, wait, I guess he must have known where the shooter was. Number two, my goodness, he must have known kids were being killed in that building, which he did not. He sat back and did nothing. He cowered it and did nothing during that time period. Well, naturally, all of us, and I include myself, said, my goodness, what kind of person does that? It was perfect. The media ran with it because now you had a villain. They had Cruz, but now you had a villain. Imagine a veteran officer who they make it seem huddled down and just did nothing and protected himself. That's not what happened. But that served Sheriff Israel's purpose. And here's what's more insulting and worse. Not only didn't he try to reach out to my client, the argument would be, well, there's thousands of deputies. Why would he reach out to my client? Because they were friends, ladies and gentlemen. Friends. Sheriff Israel worked as a football coach at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas while my client was there. Sheriff Israel's 3 sons all went to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas when my client was there. Sheriff Israel constantly spoke of my client, even asked him for help. When one of his sons got stung with a bee at the school, he called Scot Peterson. When another son was hanging out with the wrong crowd, Scot Peterson was there to help. He had Scot Peterson's cell phone number. All he had to do if he cared about the truth was call him up and say, why did you go in? How rough was it? Tell us what happened. The evidence will show he didn't do it, and there's only one reason why. Because anything my client said, which would have explained why he didn't go in, would not have served Scot Israel. He didn't want to hear the other side. He needed a scapegoat. It's politics 101.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah, that's going to be sustained at this point. Mr. Agarsh, let's get on to the facts.
The evidence will show that Scot Israel said, I give you Scot Peterson.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah, that's sustained, Mr. Agarsh.
So what happened
Hold on,
next?
sir. We're not going to talk about the former sheriff anymore. Just
Got
what you
it.
believe the evidence is going to show at trial. Go ahead, sir.
Got it. So as a result of that press conference, everything goes out there, and then it's no surprise. The governor gets involved.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah, that's sustained. Quick sidebar. Can y'all do the hits?
I have to say, I would love an attorney. I would like an attorney, like the defendant's attorney, if I was in a bad rut like this former deputy. He's a fighter, and regardless of what happens and what you believe, he's a good attorney, I think, and I can't wait to see what else he's putting out here in his opening statement, and, well, if he can get through it without the state objecting all the time. And, of course, I'm curious what he's going to do to state's witnesses and then what he brings to the table. So let's see how much longer they're on sidebar. And hopefully this won't be too long.
Wilson?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
You'll hear that the man that we're talking about, Sheriff Israel, is someone who, when he got an email from one of the parents in this case. And the parent asked him, why didn't he go in? Why? He could have prevented my daughter's death. And Sheriff Israel responded, well, we're wondering ourselves. Can't teach courage, his whole thing. But what he failed to tell her was, your daughter was killed on the first floor. He wasn't even at the scene at that time. That's not even, you heard that from the state, that's not even in contradiction. My client wasn't even on the scene. He was heading towards the scene. This is a man who cared so much about himself, the evidence will show, that to this day, I believe that there is a mother whose child was killed on the first floor who blames my client because Sheriff Israel never told her the truth. That is so disturbing. And I'm going to ask him about that. He needs to answer for that publicly. You're going to learn that an investigation began. And the lead investigator, Keith Riddick, who I'm going to have on the stand for quite some time, he's got a lot of explaining to do. It will not be quick, folks. Just a little taste. I will ask him, this issue, big issue in this case is what my client knew, right? Because he's saying he didn't know where the shots were coming from at certain times. Thought maybe the 1,200 building, but maybe the 1,300 building, maybe the 700 building. There were so many things going on that my client then says on his radio, while he believes the shooter is still in the building, Perry, referring to Deputy Perry, who was with someone who was injured. He just announced he was with someone who was injured. He said, Perry, does he know where the shooter is? Asking in real time, does that person know where the shooter is? To try to find out where it is. And you will learn that Keith Riddick left it out of his report. And when asked, why? He said, well, the shooter was gone by then. I said, you mean by a minute and a half? No one on the scene knew the shooter had gone. He left through the west exit. My client didn't know. No one knew. Don't you think that goes to a state of mind? No, I don't. That's what you're dealing with. Or number two, he wrote, there's no evidence to support what my client said to investigators, that he ordered a code red. Yet, Anna Ramos, we will call her, she will take the stand, she works for the school. She heard my client immediately order a code red for the benefit of all the kids, including the ones on the third floor that he is accused of neglecting. She came up to him and gave him a hug at one of the funerals to thank him for ordering the code red because it saved lives. Jeffrey Morford, assistant principal, he heard my client order the code red over the school radio. And then as a result, he said he ordered the code red. He only did it because he told me he heard Peterson do it. But Morford is credible and believable, yet Riddick, the lead investigator, fails to include that information in his report. This was you will learn, the evidence will show, a biased and failed investigation from the beginning, which ultimately led to charges like child neglect. We'll focus more on that throughout this case, but that somehow all of this leads to child neglect, charging him as if he's a mother who fails to give their child water or food, or a teacher.
Objection argument.
Yeah, that's sustained. Go ahead, sir.
The
What you
evidence
believe
will
the evidence will show.
The evidence will show that they charge him with child neglect, ladies and gentlemen. More on that throughout this case. Now, let's talk about the facts of what occurred and what really happened. And you've got paper and pen. Make sure that you understand exactly what occurred. Let's do a general overview first. Prosecutor kind of went over it with you. I want to start big, and then we'll get down into the minutia. I absolutely want to make sure at all times you understand this fully. If there's ever a time that I think I might need to go back and make it clear, forgive me. It's only because I want you guys to fully understand what's going on here, okay? So, first, this is a kind of an overview of the school. Now, while this board is small, it in no way represents the 45 acres that the school is. I need you all to understand that because unfortunately we're not going to get to go to the school together. We're not. So I'm going to have to do the best I can to recreate it. And like going to Paris and seeing the Eiffel Tower or Egypt and the pyramids, there is no way to properly recreate it. There's not. We're at a loss. So I'm going to do my best.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah, that's sustained. Another quick sidebar, please.
representation of the school. We'll use this to get a perspective. This is building number 1. Let's start there. Building number 1 is where my client's office is, where it was anyway. Scott's office was, and where he was while he got information that there was firecracker complaint inside the 1200 building. Okay, so understand he's here. Let me stay general. Okay, this is the 1200 building where it occurred. This is literally like a football field. I mean, this is far. Then you have next to it the 1300 building, and then you'll hear reference in my opening and throughout this case, the football field. This is over here. This is literally hundreds of yards away. Hundreds of yards from the 1200 building. So when you hear, for example, Deputy Kratz, who will testify that he went on his radio during the shooting, while the shooter was actually on the 3rd floor, and yells, "Shots fired by the football field, football field." And my client's trying to figure out in real time where the shots are coming from. Deputy Kratz is referring to over here, hundreds of yards away, not where the actual shots were coming from. Kratz will tell you with his own words, he literally thought the shooter was 30 feet away from him on the football field. So this is the overview. Okay, I'll refer to it if needed, but just so you have a perspective. So my client was here, building number 1. So he's in, we can take Sheriff's right down. Is there a way just to take that off for 1 second? We'll be putting it back up. Thank you, Judge. So my client was in his office before the shooting took place. And what he was doing is he was investigating a felony. One of the students, an 18-year-old, had a fake driver's license. And what he was doing was he was researching at the time the statute, the felony statute, so he could tell the father who was coming to the school and the daughter. He wasn't going to arrest her or anything, but they wanted to know it's a very serious offense to possess a counterfeit driver's license. So he was busy researching that. His phone was across the room being charged. What he did over here at one point, shots fired, not shots fired, excuse me, firecrackers in the 1200 building, firecrackers. Now, it was Valentine's Day, there had been fireworks let off in the building before. It wasn't like, oh my goodness, at that point. So he and Kelvin Greenleaf begin to leave. When they start to run is when all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off. You'll see on the video, they start to head towards there, and all of a sudden, fire alarm. And then they start to run. Now let me just stop. The evidence will not show that then he goes, wait a second, those firecrackers or fireworks could be gunfire. Let me go jump into my car and drive away. You will learn that that never happened. See, that we could all agree would be neglectful. But he immediately runs, and then he gets picked up by Andrew Medina, who's driving a golf cart. And the evidence will show you that at no point on their way to the 1200 building does Andrew Medina share with my client some really helpful material. Like he saw someone, that nutty cruise guy, walking with a duffel bag or some type of large bag that potentially contains some serious items in there, and that he walked into the 1200 building. He never shared that with my client. That would have been real helpful. To this day, you'll hear Kelvin Greenleaf testify that he's still angered to this day that Medina never shared that information with any of them. That would have completely changed it. My client would have known, wait.
Objection argument.
Yeah, that's the thing, Mr. Agarsh. At this point, I'm going to have to remind you, as I've done repeatedly, this isn't closing argument. This is your opening statement, sir. Let's stick to what you believe the evidence is going to show. Go ahead, sir.
The evidence will show, because we will call Kelvin Greenleaf if they don't, that he never heard Medina at all share with them the information that he had, which could have led to a different trajectory. So now, when he gets to the scene, and you all take a look at this, and it's going to be a little overwhelming at first. I promise I'm going to break it down for you, okay? But it's critical that you understand where the shots were coming from, okay? All right, let's stay general on this at first, okay? First, this is the same, we got the same thing that the prosecutor put up in his opening, but there's more detail, so it would be accurate. First, understand This represents the first floor. Even though these two are together, it's kind of overlapping. The second floor overlaps to show that it's over the first floor. But this is the first floor, right here. And second floor is here. And then third floor is here. Everybody with me so far? Okay? We've got north, west, east, south, so you can see that. Okay? And don't look at the shots just yet. Okay? That's something we'll get into in just a moment. Let's start general. As I indicated to you,
Mr. Igoe, I'm sorry. If you need your support staff to help you move this stuff around, I'm gonna ask you to step out of the jury box, please. So you need to be out here in the well of the courtroom.
Okay.
If you wanna do the signs one at a time, that's fine.
That's fair.
I can't have you in the jury box. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Okay, so I'll stand over here. Everyone can still see? Okay. This is worth repeating. Again, big picture. 6 minutes and 36 seconds, total time he's spending. We're going to show you exactly how we account for that time, okay? And this is not in dispute. I don't think that anyone's going to dispute these times. We made sure that they're actually from the material we received from the state, okay? Deputy Peterson was there for the last 4 minutes and 15 seconds. And the final 2 minutes of the 4 minutes and 15 seconds, I'm jumping ahead, were spent with the shooter on the third floor, shooting west, the furthest possible distance from where my client was. So let's stay general again. What we didn't learn just yet, and you're about to learn, is this building, the 1200 building, is 73 yards long. The evidence will show that we're talking about 3/4 of a football field. And so that you guys have an idea of what that looks like, I'd like to show you, so you have a perspective of what the building looks like. Judge, if we can turn that back on. This picture doesn't even have the entire building in it. It was the best one that we got. So what I want you to take a look at is this. Let me hit play for a second. This is, here we go. Yeah, it is playing. Okay, from one end all the way to the other end. Take a look. As you can see, this is a huge, huge building. It is nothing like I'm sure you imagine. To give you further perspective, this is to show you just the size and the distance of what we're talking about. What you're seeing now is the last 2 minutes. As I told you, the shooter was in the 1240 building, sniper firing out of 2 windows. What I'm showing this to you right now is just to see the perspective from where that shooter is to where the 700 building is and where my client was located. Try to give you some perspective. I'll pause it at one point. And by the way, what you're looking at is a recreation done by the state of what the shooter was doing. Okay. Technology. Give me a moment, folks. I'm just going to let it run. I will not stop it, but I'll talk over. This is the west side of the building. This is the side that Aaron Price was shot on. And where my client, he was on the other side of this building, 73 yards away. There's the door that you see right there where Aaron Price was shot outside of. And then all the way in the distance, on the other side is where my client was, and to the right is the 700 building. And that becomes key because a lot of kids come out of that building, hear the same shots my client did, and thought that those shots were coming from a different location. Okay, so let's continue. The first shots that my client hears, and you'll be able to see it on the video. Everything is corroborated by the video. The first shots occur here, 2:23:25. 2:23:25. This is, as you can see, the shooter is pointing his gun west, in a westerly direction. My client, by the way, is approaching the east side door, about to go in to check out a firecracker complaint. Not an active shooter. He was not there during the time that the shooter had made his way through the first floor and killed people. No one went on the radio. You'll be able to see the entire dispatch transcript. No one said, shots fired in the first floor, kids being killed. Nothing. He didn't get any of that. You'll be able to see. You'll read it yourself. He gets there, and both him and you'll hear from Greenleaf, they believe they're investigating a firecracker complaint. Because the door was open, shots get fired. My client hears a loud boom. He doesn't think, wait, kids are being killed in the 1200 building. He just hears a loud boom. The first thing he does is he's approaching the door, and he never opened up the door. He never got to, if he did, if he ever looked in the window or got close enough to do it, he probably would have seen the carnage that was created by Cruz. But he didn't get that chance. He walks close to the door. He hears those shots. The Las Vegas shooting, you will learn, just occurred months before. So sniper fire is one of the possibilities. You hear shots from outside. He feels vulnerable, you will learn, the evidence will show. But the first thing he does is he doesn't run for cover. He stands there out in the open and immediately does what a cop does. You report shots fired. Here are his dispatch remarks. And the first one he makes at 2:23:26. Note that it was 1 second after Aaron Feist is shot from outside. My client immediately gets on his police radio and he says, be advised, we have possible, could be firecrackers. So let's start there. 4 minutes and 15 seconds, the evidence will show, starts to tick when he gets on the scene. He's only got 4 minutes and 15 seconds to get to the shooter and neutralize the threat. But what you're going to learn is he's still struggling with, firecrackers? And then he says, I think we have shots fired, possible shots fired. And 1200 building is a reference because he's standing 10 feet from the 1200 building. You will see a couple of references to the 1200 building, and the evidence will show that that is his positioning at the time. Not, I'm hearing shots fired with certainty from inside the 1200 building. He never says that. The closest he gets, as you will see, is by inside. He's struggling. When he hears more shots, you will see, the evidence will show, that one of the options is it's by the 1200 building, because the building's 73 yards long, and that contains a large area, and also possibly inside sniper firing, which is exactly what it turned out to be. All that's in play. You will learn that we know so much now about what actually happened.
Objection, argument.
Yeah, that's sustained, sir.
The evidence will show that neither he nor the officers in real time had all the information that we have today. That's just a fact. So everything in his mind is at play. Everything you will learn is a possibility at that moment. Now, this is telling, because right after this, again, we're talking about 20 some odd seconds later, my client is saying, make sure we get some units over here. I need to shut down Stoneman Douglas. This is the first of 5 transmissions where my client's making it clear, we need to shut down this school. He doesn't say, we need to get into the 1200 building because kids are being killed. He says we need to shut down the school because the evidence will show that he and the other officers will testify to it. They all believed that the gunfire could be coming from anywhere, and that if, as school is letting out, parents come in, students are coming out, they could all be hit by gunfire around the building, anywhere on campus. The evidence will show not that everything was contained within the 1200 building and someone needs to rush in there. That's what the evidence will show. So my client, you will learn, went with Kelvin Greenlee. He doesn't stand in the open. But right before he does, not only does he make this first transmission to send the cavalry, you'll hear many officers saying that my client was a great service to them because they didn't know about the shooting until he announced it. I mean, he set in motion the wave of all the officers coming to the scene. He did his job. You will learn then that he also gets on his school radio before, again, going to this tactical position of cover. Before he does that, he gets on a school radio and he announces Code Red for the benefit of everybody on that campus. Then he doesn't stand out in the open, you will learn. He goes and he makes sure that he and Kelvin Greenleaf are protected over here. Because you will learn that both of them, Kelvin Greenleaf will say, listen, you don't stand out in the open. In fact, my client even said at one point to Kelvin and others, get away, get out of the way. I want to highlight just some of the other things that my client said in real time, and I also want to go into greater detail during the trial, okay, about what each of the shots meant and what he was thinking throughout this. But ultimately, you will learn that there was literally 34 seconds from these shots to here for my client to have gotten up and then somehow neutralized or killed the killer. You will learn that it took a SWAT team of 12 people 30 minutes to clear the first floor, second floor, because you don't just go running into the third floor and kill the killer. The evidence will show that the SWAT team had to first go through every classroom. It took them 30 minutes to clear the first floor, second floor, third floor. The evidence will show that even if my client knew, which he didn't, where precisely the shots were coming from at 4 minutes and 15 seconds when that started, there is no way he would have made a difference. No way.
Objection argument.
Yeah, that's sustained.
The evidence will also show that you'll hear from the officers who are over here, west of the building, that even when the shooter was in the middle of the third floor, that these officers thought that the shots were coming from a different location, outside, not inside. Just a few more transitions I want to go through, and again, we have the whole trial to be together to go through everything. I don't want to bring it all out in my opening, we'll get to it. Okay, I'm anxious for you to hear the evidence, okay? My client is saying, we don't have a description yet, we just hear shots fired, appears to be shots fired. Again, you see him trying to lock down the school. Get the school locked down, gentlemen. Get it locked down. What that's doing, the evidence will show, is it's keeping officers and people away. Now, did that turn out to be, in retrospect, the evidence will show, the wrong decision?
Objection argument.
Yeah, that's sustained. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of these opening statements is just to give you a preview of what the lawyers believe the evidence will be. Mr. Agash, I'm going to admonish you at this point. Please refrain from any further argument. Continue and or conclude your opening statement, please. Thank you.
You will hear officers testify that by shutting down the school, officers didn't get in. And in retrospect, they will tell you that
Objection argument.
Yeah, that's sustained.
Okay.
That's sustained. Go ahead, sir.
Great. So, again, at 2:25:56, this is all while the shooter is shooting. My client's saying, we're locking down the school, we're locking it down. He's reporting, I hear shots fired. So this allegation that he doesn't then include that he heard extra shots, it's right there. He's telling you, shots fired. And this is key. This is why I put it in red. My client said at 2:28, so we're talking about literally 25 seconds after the shooter was done shooting, but understand something, the evidence will show. My client didn't know, nor did any of the officers know, that the shooter was gone. He slipped out, you will learn, through the west side door, the opposite side that he came in, and blended in and got away. So all the officers are thinking, for quite some time, that the shooter or shooters, and by the way, no one knew it was just one. You'll hear from the officers saying there's the +1 rule. That if you think there's one, think that there may be two. If you think that there's three, there may be four. So understand that the evidence will show now we know there's one twisted monster. But at the time they're thinking there may be multiple. That's what the evidence will show. But here's what my client says. Do not approach the 12 or 1300 building. Stay at least 500 feet away at this point. You will get to decide why my client is including the 1300 building instead of just saying 1200 building. He's also saying, Perry, does he know where the shooter is? Asking in real time, does he know where the shooter is? You will learn that the lead investigator, he will tell you that he left that out of his report because he didn't think that was relevant. Lockdown, right now, nobody's leaving the school, my client says. And still, look at this time, 2:45:25. The shooter's been gone for 18 minutes. And my client is telling everybody, between the 12 and 1300 building is the last time we heard shots. Between the 12 and 1300 building. That's what all the officers heard, that's what they believed. Now I know you're wondering, didn't he get any information on his radio? Right? You'll learn that kids had cell phones. You will learn that they did call in that there is a shooter, and that shooter's located in the 1200 building. But you will learn that those calls went to Coral Springs Police Department, not Broward Sheriff's Office. You will learn that nobody conveyed the information that went to Coral Springs Police Department with the Broward Sheriff's Office. You will learn that nobody ordered that the radios be patched so that two agencies who are supposed to be working together could know all the same information. You will learn that Coral Springs police officers knew certain information because those calls came in to Coral Springs. But that the Broward Sheriff's Office officers, like my client, you will see what they learned, and at no time did they ever inform him that there were shots fired inside the 1200 building and that children were being harmed. Even Sheriff Israel will come and tell you that that was a colossal failure that hindered my client. He will also admit to you that the radios that they were using failed miserably. Meaning officers, you will learn, will come in here and say that they were trying to communicate with fellow officers and that the radios were throttling. So when they would try to make any type of announcement or hear things, they couldn't. It was, one officer will testify, it was like having a brick in your hand. Yeah, they have good training, you'll learn, but they never have training where their radios don't work. You will learn that officers will say, yeah, they have training, but they never have training where you have no idea where the shooter's located, just a general area. I have to mention Denise Reed, because the state still, they read her name as somebody they might call. And if they do, I will tell you, this is an assistant principal who may testify, and she may tell you that during the shooting, allegedly, she got within 15 feet of my client and allegedly claimed, hey, there's shooting going on, whatever she's going to say. I don't know exactly what version she's going to give to you. But something like indicating that my client must have known then that shots were coming. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that there is a video showing her movement down the hallway. And you will see for your own eyes that in spite of her giving that sworn testimony, that she had this contact with my client, she literally is walking without breaking stride and then goes into the band room and stays in there during the whole shooting. You can clearly see with your own eyes she never, ever had any contact with my client, in spite of what she may allege if the state calls her. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, I want to briefly touch on the perjury count, just for a moment. Detective Curcio will testify that when my client came in for this interview, it was 2 days after the shooting. He wasn't under investigation at all. That didn't come until a year later with charges brought. So he comes in, and Detective Curcio was the detective in the Nicholas Cruz homicide case. So my client, being a witness, has to be investigated. My client wasn't on the hot seat at the time. My client had no reason to think that he was going to be in trouble at all. The evidence will show that there were just questions asked. So what happened? What did you see? What happened? And specifically, Detective Curcio will tell you that he asked this in a chronological order. Like, okay, so when you got to the scene, you get to that building, how many shots do you hear? My client said 2 to 3, because it's exactly how many he heard, and we know that because the first shots he hears is Aaron Feist being shot, and he was shot 2 to 3 times. That's the perjury count. Detective Curcio will tell you that he never then asks my client, how many total shots did you hear from beginning to end? He will tell you, yeah, I didn't think that question was necessary. That's the perjury count. The second part of the perjury count is they claim that my client saw some kids leave the 1200 building. While my client's on his radios, while he's telling kids in the 700 building stay back, while he's doing about a million things with the stress of the world on his shoulders.
Objection argument.
Yeah, that's sustained.
The evidence will show that they're claiming my client didn't see kids running out of the 1200 building. I'm quite certain you will not see any video of those kids actually leaving. I would imagine if they're representing it that kids did leave the 1200 building. He told Detective Curcio he didn't see kids leaving the 1200 building. There will be no evidence that those kids ever came up to my client or had blood on them or something to indicate that they need to be spoken to or investigated. The evidence will show he didn't lie about that at all. Another charge for which he did not commit.
Objection argument.
Yeah, that's sustained, Mr. Eiglash.
Amended
Because
that.
of your continued objectionable comments, I'm going to ask you to conclude your opening statement at this time. Go ahead, sir.
I'm concluding, ladies and gentlemen. The evidence will show that my client did not commit any of the offenses alleged. He was sacrificed and thrown under the bus.
Objection argument.
And
Yep,
the
that
only-
is sustained.
And the only verdict in this case, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention. The only verdict that speaks the truth in this case, based upon the evidence, is not guilty. Thank you.
Wow. I have never heard an opening statement get that many objections from the opposite side. Obviously, the DA is not going for any of this stuff, and looks like most of them were sustained. That said, I have to applaud the defense attorney, and I believe he had an excellent opening statement. And I'm very interested to see what evidence and what witnesses that they have. And looking more into this case, and I heard him speak on, I believe it was a Court TV a couple weeks back. I believe that Scot Peterson is he was thrown under the bus. I really believe that, and they used him to, not have to take blame for a lot of the other things going on. Bottom line is, Nicholas Cruz alone killed all those students and those teachers. I don't believe this deputy did anything wrong. At worst, if they feel like that he didn't get there in a certain amount of time, or if he paused too long or what have you, then he should have lost his job. But to prosecute him in this way, I'm starting to think that they're just trying to use him as a scapegoat for the department, because Parkland shooting was a horrific, horrific day, and it's still haunts that area and the state of Florida to this day. But let me know what you guys think of the case for these opening statements thus far. And what do you think? Do you think this deputy is innocent or not guilty? Or do you think that he truly is what they say he is, a coward? Let me know, and if you want me to continue to cover the case more in depth, let me know as well. With that said and done, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and most of all, stay safe.